Hello everybody, and greetings to you from the other side of the world. I'm very sorry that I'm not able to be present with you in person, but this is the effect, of course, of the coronavirus epidemic that we are all enduring this year, and I hope that the end is in sight. For the time being, however, we have to operate in this way by long-distance video, and so I give you a special greeting even though I cannot see you, and I hope that you will find the seminar that we are doing today of great help to you. What I want to talk about basically is what is wrong with the world. I think everybody would agree that the world that we live in is not perfect. Something has gone wrong somewhere. And whether we are philosophers or theologians or politicians or just ordinary people, we all think that something has to be done in order to put things right. And that, of course, is true. That is a very important observation to make. But before we put things right, before we can do that, we have to try to understand what is wrong. I take as an example for this a disease. If you go to your doctor because you sense that something is wrong in your body, the most important thing the doctor has to do is to work out what it is that is causing the problem. Why are you suffering in the way that you are? And of course, if he can do this, if he can diagnose what the problem is, then he can begin to find the right cure for it. Now, if your doctor does not do that, if your doctor simply gives you a medicine and says, take this, without examining what the problem is, without trying to discover what the cause of the pain might be, then of course you could be in big trouble. It might happen by accident that you get something that helps. That's possible. We can't say that it can never happen. But it's very dangerous to operate like that, because the chances are that he will give you something that does not work. And if it does no harm at all, that's maybe a good thing. But again, you cannot know that for certain. It is very possible that the medicine that he gives you actually makes your condition worse than it was before. Now, we know this, of course, from our personal experience of diseases in our own life. But what is true of us and of our bodies is also true of the world as a whole. In order to put things right, if we can put things right, we have to understand not only what has gone wrong, but why it has gone wrong. What is the source of the problems that we have in the world? Now, human beings have been trying to discover this for many years. This is nothing new, and we can look around at different religions, at different philosophies, at different ideas which have emerged over the centuries as an attempt to solve the world's problems. And some of these solutions, proposed solutions, make things a little bit better than they were before. That's possible. Some of them don't really have much effect at all, and some of them make the situation a good deal worse. As Christians, we believe that human effort to find a solution to the world's problems is bound to fail. It's bound to fail because we as human beings are limited creatures. We are part of the world which has gone wrong. But we do not have the perspective to be able to understand this. You see, we are we are caught up in a mystery, in a problem which is bigger than we are. In order to understand it, in order to get some kind of perspective on our life and on the problems that come about in the world, somehow or other, we have to go out of the world. We have to be able to stand back from the world and observe it in an objective manner. The problem, of course, is that we cannot do this. I cannot escape from the life that I have been given. I cannot go away and look at the universe and look at the situation in which I live to be able to make an objective assessment of its qualities, of its deficiencies, and so on. I have to live within the context, and of course, if I put it a different way, I am part of the problem. Because I am part of the problem and live with the problem, I'm not able to understand it with the objective character that is necessary if it is going to be cured. Because, of course, again, if I take the image of your doctor is able to diagnose what is wrong with you, but he does this, of course, without sharing your particular problem. He does not have this disease himself, but he can see from an objective standpoint what is wrong with you. So somehow or other, we need to find this objective standpoint. And as Christians, we believe that the only really objective standpoint is the standpoint of God. The standpoint of God. Why? Because God is our creator. God is the one who has made the world. God is the one who understands what the world is like. God is the one who knows what the world ought to be like. He is the one who has given the power, the capacity, the opportunity to the world to develop along lines which are pleasing to him, which are in agreement with his will. He has that power, he has that ability, as I say, because he made us in the first place. But how do we discover what God thinks? How do we know what God expects of us, what God wants us to think and say and do? Well, of course, we have to listen to what he has told us. If I put it in a simple way, the only way we can find out what is wrong with the world, what is wrong with ourselves, is for God to tell us this, for God to say to us what he expects, why we have gone wrong, and how this can be put right. And God has done this, of course, through his prophets in ancient times, but above all, in the person of his Son, Jesus Christ, who came into the world in order, first of all, to demonstrate that the world belongs to God, that he is the Lord and ruler of the universe, but also that he is the one who has put things right, that he is the Savior. Now, because he has done this, because there is only one God, there is only one way of salvation. And this is where we find ourselves in difficulties when we enter into dialogue and conversation with other people, because other people are trying to find the answer to the problems. We may agree about what the problems are to some extent, but they propose different solutions. And we have to say to them, You may be very sincere. You may be trying your best to work out what to do in a world which has gone wrong. We may agree with you in many ways about these things that we don't like, that we want to change, but we cannot accept your proposed solutions. We cannot accept them because your solutions are your ideas. They're things which you have decided must be wrong. You have worked this out in your own mind, but you have not listened to the revelation which has come from God. And we say that only that revelation contains the answer to the questions that we are asking, only that revelation which contains the solution to the problems that we are having to face. Now, what does the Bible say? What does the revelation of God tell us about this? Well, first of all, the most important point is that the trouble that exists in the world, what is wrong with the world, is because it has rebelled against God. Evil, sin, all these things are a rebellion against the Creator. They are not a structural fault. It is not as if God has made the world but not done it properly. That there is something in the construction of the universe which is inadequate or which is wrong, and therefore, when it is put to the test, when you try to live it out, you discover that it doesn't work. This is not the problem. God made the world in a perfectly adequate way. God gave us a creation which was meant to be used and which can be used for His glory without any problem at all. But the difficulty has come, I say, not from the creation itself, not from the things that we have given to us, but from something inside us, something which has rebelled against God. Nothing that God has made is bad in itself. Now, this is a difficult thing to argue, but we need to think about it. Because some people will say, but poisons are bad, surely. I mean, these are bad things. We must not touch them. There are snakes which can kill you. Insects which can kill you. Surely these things are bad. Why do they exist? At the moment, of course, we are asking this question about the coronavirus and the pandemic that we have been experiencing. Why does this virus exist in the world? Is it not a bad thing? And the answer to that has to be no. These things in and of themselves are not bad. They have been created by God, and they have a purpose in His mind, in His created order, a purpose which we may not understand, but which is there. What we must guard against is the wrong use of these things. For example, take poison, for example. For instance, we have a poison in and of itself. If we take this poison, then it will kill us. But we are not supposed to take that poison. That is not what the poison is for. Now, there may be some other purpose that it has. We may know what that is. We may not know what that is. It's hard to say. Unless we investigate each individual case. We know only that applied to us, it will have harmful effects, and therefore we do not apply it to us. There is nothing strange or unacceptable about this. There are some plants, for example, that we can eat, and there are other things that we cannot eat because they will harm us. It is up to us to know the difference, to work this out, and to take the things which are good for us, to avoid the things which are not good for us. We have minds which are adapted, which are able to make this distinction, to discern what is good and what is bad for us to use, things, the way in which we use them. We can work this out, and we know that we can do some things, with certain plants, for example. We can do some things with trees, we can do some things with rocks, and so on, but not other things. So we have minds to determine what we can and cannot do. And we must not say that any of these things is in and of itself bad. Nor can we say that trees or rocks or plants or whatever it is in the created order has the ability to rebel against God. Only people can do that. Only a person can rebel. A rock cannot do this. An animal cannot do this. A dog or a cat cannot rebel against God because a dog and a cat does not have a relationship with God. This is fundamental. You see, you and I are created in the image and likeness of God. What this means is that there is something in us which is like God, something in us which enables us to communicate with God and enables God to communicate with us. Now, of course, in itself, this is a very good thing. Human beings are better than rocks or trees. Human beings are better than animals. We have an ability to live in a higher and more constructive way than they do. This is obvious. We have built great civilizations. We have developed many wonderful things in the world. A dog cannot do that. Not even an intelligent animal like maybe a chimpanzee or something like this is incapable of constructing the kind of civilization, the kind of society that we as human beings have constructed. So there is something very precious, something very wonderful about the way that we have been created. But as with everything of this kind, if this gift which we have from God, if this image of God which is in us goes wrong, if it does the wrong thing, then of course the result is worse than it can be, because again, let me give you an example. Say a dog. What can a dog do? A dog lives in the way that dogs live. They cannot think. They cannot. They have no reason. They live by instinct, and they just try to survive from one day to the next in the best way that they can. But they never build anything. They never make anything. They never construct anything that we would call a society or anything like that. So if the dog somehow goes crazy, if the dog develops a disease and behaves in a strange way, the effect is not really all that serious. It may be unpleasant to see a dog in that condition, but the dog is not going to be able to destroy very much other than himself. But of course with human beings it is different, because we as human beings have been given the power by God to rule over his created order in this world. And so we have been given a responsibility. We have been given a privilege to develop the creation which he has made and which he has bequeathed to us. And if we do the wrong thing, then the consequences for the creation, for everything, will be much more serious. Now, how do we do the wrong thing? Do we do the wrong thing by accident? Not really. Perhaps in some way we make mistakes, and it's possible, but this is not the same thing as rebelling against God. It is true that we are limited in our perspectives, and sometimes we lack the knowledge that we need to be able to develop the created order in the way that we should. But we're not really talking about this, because ignorance can always be corrected. We can learn, we can study, and we do this all the time. I mean, nobody has knowledge given to them automatically. We all have to learn, and we are given minds and brains to be able to do that. So we do. And we learn the principles by which the world operates, and so on. That in itself is possible, and that is what we do, and we have always done throughout the history of the human race. Now, we are talking about something different. We are not talking about ignorance. We are talking about rebellion. And rebellion is not necessarily the fruit of lack of knowledge. It's not because we don't know these things that we rebel. It is because of something in us which propels us in that direction. What makes us different from the animals, and what makes the fact that we are created in God's image so special, is that God gave us what we call a free will. Now, what is free will? In some ways, there is nothing I can do to change my life. I live in the way that I do. I was born at a particular time. I'm a particular age. My body works in a particular way, and there is nothing I can do to change that. So I do not have free will in that respect. I cannot decide to go back and live 1,000 years ago, nor can I turn myself into a creature that lives 1,000 years in the future. I cannot do this. So I have to live in the time, in the place where I have been born, and with the circumstances that I have been given. So in many respects, I am limited, I am bound by circumstances which are beyond my control. But this is not what we mean when we talk about free will. When we talk about free will, we are talking essentially about the ability to obey our Creator. You see, God made us for Himself. God wants to have fellowship, to have relationship with us. He wants us to be not only His children, but also His co-workers. He wants us to share with Him in the government of the world in which He has placed us. And in order to do this, of course, He must give us freedom. Because if He does not do that, if God creates simply a robot, who acts according to His commands and just does what He wants to do, then, of course, there is no real relationship with Him. A robot cannot speak back to its creator. A robot cannot think by itself. This is a mechanical instrument which can do many wonderful things, it's true, robots are very useful in many ways, but you can't really have a relationship with them. You cannot communicate in this way. And this is what God wants us to do. This is why he has made us in the way that he has. And of course, if we look at it like this, it is an immense privilege. It is a wonderful thing that he has done for us. But if you do this as God has done, there is also a risk. And that risk is that the person who has this free will, who is able to communicate with God in this way, may decide not to do that, may decide that he or she wants to be independent, wants to live a different kind of life, wants to create his or her own future and not follow the plan which God has made, not conform to the vision which God has for us and for our future. And if this happens, you see, if we say to ourselves, well, I want to decide for myself how I'm going to live. I don't want to have to follow what God wants for me. I'm independent. I have my own mind, and I can decide for myself. Then this is rebellion. Now, if you look at this from the wider perspective, if you take a big picture view of this, you can see that it is a very foolish thing to think. Because after all, who am I? I am only one small person living in an immense universe. There are many, many people just like me. If we all decide for ourselves what we want to do, if we all want to be independent, then of course the result will be chaos, because I may want to do one thing, and you may want to do something quite different. And if our plans, if our ideas do not coincide, if they clash with one another, then trouble is bound to be the result. Now, if that is true between human beings, between you and me, how much more is it going to be true between us and God? Because if you stop to think about it, the only way to exercise your free will in relationship to God is either to obey him freely, voluntarily, in which case you are in fellowship, yes, in relationship with your Creator. You understand your Creator, and you understand why he has made you the way he has, or you go a different way. And if you go a different way, then inevitably that way that you choose is going to be worse. It is going to go against what the Creator wants for us. And if you go against the will of the Creator, then of course you are rebelling not only against him as a person, but against everything that he has done, against everything that he has planned. And this is really what has happened. You see that the human race has disobeyed. The human race has disobeyed God by wanting to be independent of him. And because of this, because we want to decide for ourselves how to live and what to think and so on, we have cut ourselves off from our Creator. We are not doing what he wants us to do. And because we are not doing that, we are in rebellion against him. Now, God, of course, knew that this was going to happen. He knew when he gave his creatures free will that they would abuse this, that they would exercise the power that was given to them to turn away from him. And some people have said, well, if that's true, if God knew that this was going to happen, is he not responsible for it? He didn't have to create us in this way. He could have done something different. He could have avoided rebellion by not creating beings capable of it. And of course, we have to say, well, yes, that's true. He could have done that. But if he had done that, of course, the purpose of creating us would have been defeated. God has many things that he has created, things which do his will, which live according to his decrees, but they do not have a choice. They don't understand what they're doing. As I said, I mentioned this already with animals and so on. They live the way God has made them, and they cannot object to that. I mean, they just have to live in that way because they have no inner power to reason, to understand, or to object to these things. We have. This has been given to us. And so it is true that God has created the possibility for us to rebel. But although he created this possibility, this does not make him responsible for the actions that we take. And we see this, of course, in our own human lives. I mean, there are certain things that I can do, if I choose to do them, which will be harmful to me. I mean, I can kill myself. That's a possibility. But if I do that, I am the one responsible for it. That I cannot blame some other person for doing this. And other people probably don't want me to do that. I mean, if they knew that I was planning to commit suicide, they might do everything they could to stop me, to say, don't do that, it's a bad idea, go on living, and life is better than death, and make all kinds of arguments like this. But I, of course, still have the power to put an end to my life. And if I am determined to do that, then no argument to the contrary is going to persuade me. Now, why would I want to do that? This is the mystery. The mystery is not why God created us with this ability, but why we should think in this way. Because, of course, to rebel against God is a form of suicide. It is not physical death, not yet anyhow, but it is spiritual death. Because when I rebel against God, I cut myself off from the source of my life, the source of my spiritual life, the source of my spiritual being. And I do this deliberately. So I do this of my own free will. I want to be independent, even if I know that it makes no sense, even if I know that it's wrong, even if I know that I would be much better off obeying God. Nevertheless, there is something in me which pushes me towards this desire, towards this longing for independence, which I call freedom. You see, letting me go in this way. Now, if I do that, if I exercise my free will in this way, I am responsible for this. In fact, I want to be responsible for it. That is, I would not rebel otherwise. You see, the whole idea of rebelling is to take charge of my own life. But if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to control myself in this way, then if things go wrong, who can I blame except myself? Because I have made that decision. I have done this in this way. And this is how we have to understand the rebellion against God, which has happened in human life. God created the conditions which made such a rebellion possible. Yes, he did not want it to happen, but he knew that once he allowed his creatures that possibility, that freedom, that they would do this, that they would turn against him. But it is the responsibility of the creature himself, and indeed the creature will claim this. You see, the man who wants independence, who wants to be cut off from God, has deliberately decided this, may even be proud of this. You see, to claim that he's not forced to do the will of God and so on. He doesn't accept this. He's turned away from it. So he takes on himself the responsibility for this, because this responsibility is part of his freedom. Now, saying this, of course, we realize that rebellion against God is a spiritual act. God is a spirit. He has created us as spirits. The image of God in us is a spiritual thing. And we are the only creatures in this world who have this ability. You see, as I've said before, animals cannot do this, but human beings can. We call this personal responsibility. You have to be a person in order to be capable of rebelling against God, because to be a person is to be a spiritual being. Now, it's true, of course, that we have a material body as well. In our physical body, we are tied to this world. We can do bad things to our body, yes, but we know that if we want to live in the world, we have to conform to its principles. For example, if I throw myself off a tall building and fall to the ground, I shall probably die because I have disobeyed the law of gravity. I cannot say to the world, gravity does not exist, I can defy this, I don't have to pay attention to that, I can fly away if I want, and nothing will happen to me. Because if I do something like that, of course, my body will tell a different story. My body is subjected to the laws of nature, to the laws of gravity. The same thing, of course, if I eat or drink bad things. My body will suffer as a result. This is not a decision which the body takes of its own free will. It is something that happens because of nature, because two things which are not compatible have come together, and therefore one will bring harm to the other. But as human beings, we are spiritual creatures, and it is the spiritual dimension in us that governs our thoughts and ultimately our behavior. What we do is the result of what we think, and what we think is the result of who we are and what we are in the presence of God, which is that we are spiritual beings. Now, having said this, of course, it will become clear that the rebellion against God into which we are involved, did not start in the material world. We do not rebel against God because of something we ate. We do not rebel against God because of some physical defect in our body, something that's gone wrong in our brain or something like this. No. Rebellion against God is a spiritual thing, and it has begun among spiritual creatures. This is the most important thing we need to understand. These spiritual creatures are for the most part hidden from our eyes. We are, of course, spiritual creatures also, and so we can be aware of them, and we can communicate with them, and they can communicate with us. But because we are material beings, we live in the material world, and we cannot see these spiritual creatures. You see, they are there, but they are not visible to our physical bodies. But the fact that they are not visible does not mean that they are not powerful. In fact, we would say that they are more powerful because they are not limited by the material things that tie us down. I mean, I am a spiritual creature, but I am bound by my body. I'm limited by this. I have an imagination, I have a mind which can think beyond my spiritual body, and I can create in my mind whole worlds and whole lots of ideas that don't in fact exist. I mean, that is a possibility, but there are limits to what I can do. I can't go anywhere or do anything that goes against the boundaries which are set by my physical being. So that's a very important point. Spiritual creatures, of course, are not limited in this way. They can operate purely in the spiritual realm, and therefore are capable of things that we cannot do ourselves. Now, before I get into this subject in greater depth, I just want to say that because rebellion against God is spiritual, the problems that have occurred in the world are fundamentally spiritual in nature. They are not material. This means that if we are going to confront them, if we are going to face up to them and try to decide what to do about them, we have to do this by spiritual means. We cannot use material things in order to combat spiritual forces. Now, it's very important that we understand this, because one of the big problems in the world today is that people do not respect this fundamental difference. Some people believe that all you have to do is throw lots of money at a problem. You know that if you invest in something, if you help out with various programs and of development and so on, that these things will resolve the problems of the human race. And so they pour a lot of resources, a lot of physical resources, into trying to solve the human problem. Of course, all that really happens is that they move the human problem to a different level, to a different dimension, if you like. They don't solve it, they simply make it worse. The fact that human beings hate each other, that they go to war with each other, this has been true since the beginning of time. The difference now is that whereas in the past the effects of this were limited. I might be able to kill my neighbor, but I couldn't destroy the universe in the process. Whereas now, of course, we are so technologically developed and so on, that not only can we kill other people, but we can destroy the world or to a very large extent as well. Our knowledge and our abilities to use the resources of the world around us have not solved the problem. They have in fact made the problem worse. And so we have to resist this. We have to resist the idea that the material world is the source of our problems. It is not. And above all, to resist the idea that the material things can resolve our problems. They cannot. Who or what are the spiritual creatures that I am talking about? The Bible calls them angels. We are told that when God created the world, part of his creation was that he made the angels as well. Who are these? The angels are servants of God who share in his spiritual nature. They are not infinite in the way that God is. They are not all-powerful in the way that God is. They cannot decide for themselves what they want to do in the way that God does. They are creatures in just the way that we are, similar in that respect. But from our perspective, of course, they are more powerful. They have greater freedom than we do. Greater freedom because they are not bound by material existence. The angels are persons in their own right, and therefore they have the ability to rebel against God. The difference between human beings and angels in this respect is that whereas all human beings have rebelled against God, and I will come back to that in our next session, only some of the angels have done so. We do not know how many angels there are. We cannot count them. So because of this, we cannot say what percentage of the angels may have rebelled against God. It is pointless trying to ask this kind of question. The fact remains that some of them did. And we know that they were led in this rebellion by one particular angel, the angel that we have learned to call Satan. That is the name that we have given to him. And the other angels who have turned away from God are the servants of Satan. Now, who was Satan? And why was his rebellion as significant as it was and still is? To a large extent, this remains hidden from our eyes. We do not know ultimately who Satan was or why he did what he did. We can only guess from some indications which are given to us in the Bible, which suggest possible explanations for this. One of these is the belief that Satan may have been the most important angel. It is possible that God made him a little more powerful, a little better, or something than other angels. We don't know that for sure, but it may be something like this. You know, that he was given a very special place in the plan of God. If that is true, it may also be that Satan thought that he could use his position in order to replace God, that he didn't really need God in his life because he had enough power and enough freedom to be able to live on his own. And so he objected to God. You see, he rebelled against God and established himself, in effect, as his own independent God. That there would be no reference to his creator anymore. He could live in an independent way. As I say, that is a theory, it is a speculation. We don't have proof that this is the case. We only think this because of what has happened as a result. We look at the result and we say, well, perhaps this is why things happened in the way that they do. The Bible does not address this question directly, but it does refer to kings in the ancient world who thought in this particular way. It was very common for kings in ancient times to be worshipped as gods in their own right. And if we look at Isaiah chapter 14 and verses 12 to 15, we read what the prophet there has to say about the king of Babylon. Babylon, which was a major power at the time, and whose king thought he was a god. And in this prophecy, in this passage, the prophet says that the king thought of himself as the day star, it says, the son of the dawn, the greatest of the stars in heaven. Well, of course, you wouldn't normally say this kind of thing about any human being. This is not the language that we use to talk about other people, not even great people, even important people. It suggests, when the prophet says this, that the king of Babylon was in fact behaving in a way very similar to the way that Satan behaved. Perhaps this is what Satan thought. You see, that he was in some respects the king of the universe, that he had light in him, that he could be the star, be the guide in the darkness for others, and that he was not dependent in this way. But just as the king of Babylon fell into error and eventually was destroyed for thinking like this, so Satan also fell into error. Satan could not fulfill this promise or this idea. You see, he was unable to realize the potential which he thought he could unleash in his own being. And this is the result of his false estimation of himself, that instead of achieving what he wanted, instead of getting the kingdom that he thought he was entitled to, he actually fell away from God and became the source of rebellion. Now, those other angels who were subjected to him, or who sympathized with him in some way, who followed him, they followed him into his rebellion. Why? Well, out of loyalty to him in some way. Again, this is maybe hard for us to understand, but sometimes we see this in human life. A great person does something wrong, but he has followers. He has people who follow him, even though it's a bad idea to do that. It doesn't stop them from doing it, and the result is that the rebellion becomes not just the fault of a single person, but there is a group of people who join in this. You see, it's more than just one person rebelling against whatever, against his lord or his boss in some way. So this may be where the fallen angels come from, that they were servants of Satan, they were loyal to Satan, and when he turned away from God, they turned away as well. In the Bible, these fallen angels are called demons. It is a different word given to them, but structurally speaking, they are the same. Demons are angels. They're angels who have rebelled against God in following their leader, who is Satan. And this is the world that we live in. We live in a world where Satan and his angels have a presence and a power which has entangled us, human beings, in their rebellion. So your rebellion against God, my rebellion against God, is not a personal decision that I have taken myself. It is a trap into which I have been led, not so much by myself, because of course it happened long before I was born, but by the first human beings, whom Satan tempted to follow him and not God. And that is going to be the subject of the second part of our seminar. We'll have a little break now and come back to that in a few minutes' time. Thank you very much. Well, welcome back, everybody, to the second part of our seminar for today. And I want to begin just by repeating what I said at the end of the first part so that we understand where we are. I was talking about Satan, this great angel who fell away from God. And this was an act of his own free will. Nobody told Satan that he had to do that. God certainly did not command him to do that. It was a decision that he took. This rebellion, of course, was in his mind before he actually did it. He planned it. It was not an accident. It was not something that happened in spite of himself. We cannot say that Satan was trying to do God's will and failed in some respect. You see, that he wasn't able to do that. No, he wanted to rebel. He planned this from the beginning. And therefore, of course, he is responsible for the consequences. Now, if we try to analyze this and say to ourselves, well, what is this all about? We see that Satan's rebellion is rooted in two things. It has two essential aspects to it. The first is pride, and the second is disobedience. Now, pride and disobedience correspond to what I have just said about Satan having it in his mind before he actually did it. Pride is an attitude of mind. It is something in the heart. It is something that we think in ourselves. And disobedience is the result. This is the pattern that repeats itself in all rebellion against God. My rebellion against God begins in my heart. It is something that I think. It is pride. Why do I do this? Because I believe that somehow I can be my own master, that somehow I do not need God to tell me what to do, that I can live my own life without reference to Him. Why is this pride? What is pride? Pride is assuming something that is objectively false about me. Why do I think that I can live my own life? I did not create myself. I am governed and controlled by many forces in the world about which I can do nothing. I have no power to change the circumstances in which I live. I can run away from responsibilities. I can reject the inheritance which I have been given. But if I do those things, of course, I do not make my life any better. I just find myself in other problems and difficulties which may be even more serious than the ones I'm running away from. And yet there is something in me which leans in that direction. There's some power, there's some force inside me which wants to be like this, which dares to be like this, which puts myself first, which makes me think that I can do that. I can be my own boss, my own ruler. And of course, it is utterly foolish if you stand back and look at the big picture of the world, of creation. I mean, who am I to do this? You see, and one of the great illusions, one of the great falsehoods of modern life, or indeed of human life in general, is to believe that human beings have this kind of power. There is no real freedom or real independence in this way. And why not? Well, because we are part of a much bigger reality. We are part of a universe, and to believe that somehow we can control it or avoid it or contradict it is absurd. It makes no sense whatsoever. The world will destroy us. We will not destroy it if we stop to think like this. But pride is such a thing in us. You see, this is this force which makes no sense. It is completely illogical, and yet it is very powerful. It is something that is present in all of us, and it is something which was present, presumably, in Satan as well. Without that, if that force, if that phenomenon had not been there, he would not have disobeyed, he would not have rebelled. Of course, the minute you start thinking along these lines, the minute that you surrender to your pride, then disobedience to God is inevitable, because the minute if you make yourself your own God, if you decide that this is what you want to do and you are going to live in that way, then you are going to go against God's will. Now, you may not go against God's will completely. You may, in some respects, conform to God's will. because you think it's going to be of some advantage to you. For example, God tells us that we are not to kill other people. And you may decide for yourself that you don't want to kill other people either. You may say, well, I'm not going to kill other people because if I do that, their friends and relatives will want to kill me. So it's not to my advantage. My self-interest is to allow other people to live. You might argue along that line. But if you do that, of course, you will be doing the right thing, perhaps, but you will be doing it for the wrong reasons. Because the reason we do not kill other people is not because it's inconvenient for us to do this, or it may be potentially dangerous for us. It is because other people, like ourselves, we are made in the image and likeness of God, and that to kill another person is to reject the truth of God which has been given to us. So it is our obedience to God which makes us refuse to kill another human being, not the sense of our own self-interest. So this is what happens. You see, you can do a good thing. You can do right things for the wrong reasons, and this makes it sometimes very difficult to separate these principles. You see, we see other people doing things which are good, and we praise them for that. We like this, but we have to ask ourselves: are they doing this for the right reason? Satan, you see, is also like this. Satan may do things that in themselves are good. The Bible tells us that Satan appears as an angel of light, and who does not want light? That's a good thing. But if he does this, of course he does it not in order to glorify God, but in order to get us even more firmly in his power. So we have to remember that. You see, we have to look beyond what he actually does in particular circumstances and consider the reasons behind it. You see that Satan, even if he appears to be an angel of light, is still rebelling against God. He is still disobeying what God has commanded him to do. The other thing, of course, about Satan's rebellion is that it is self-defeating. This is why it makes no sense. You see, if you cut yourself off from your Creator, what are you doing? You are cutting yourself off from the source of your life. You are cutting yourself off from the source of your power. Whatever life you have, whatever ability you have, whatever authority or power has been given to you by God. So if you go around ignoring this, or denying this, or rejecting this, you are cutting yourself off from it. You see, you're simply saying, well, I can be my own life, I can be my own light, I can be my own power, which of course is not true. So you are in effect not only cutting yourself off, but you are destroying yourself in this way. Now, the curious thing here is that even though Satan does this and tries to get us to do the same by following him, Satan does not disappear. He does not vanish completely. And we have to ask ourselves, well, why not? You see, if you cut yourself off from the source of your life, presumably you die, and if you die, that's the end. I mean, there is no future for you. So why has Satan survived in some way? What's he doing? How does this work? And here we have to say that Satan survives only because God allows him to survive. Now, this is a great mystery. Why would God do that? Why would God permit Satan, the one who has rebelled against him, to go on living in some secondary way? Satan has no power of his own. By rebelling against God, he has cut himself off from God, but God nevertheless tolerates this. Ultimately, I think the reason for this has to be that God hates nothing that he has made. It's very difficult for us to understand this, but even those who have rebelled against God, God still loves in some very difficult way to understand. He loves them because he has made them. He loves them because ultimately there is at least some hope that somehow or other they might be rescued from their rebellion. Now, we have no evidence that Satan ever experiences this. There is nothing in the Bible to suggest that one day his rebellion will end and that he will be reconciled to God. That we are not told. It's very unlikely because as a spiritual creature, Satan dwells in eternity. And because he is eternal, his behavior, his actions are also eternal. So his rebellion against God will not cease, even though he continues in existence. But such is the mystery of God the Creator, of God who loves his creation, that in spite of everything, God does not destroy him. God allows him to continue to exist. However, we also need to know that Satan is controlled by God, that Satan may appear to have great power and so on, and he is able to tempt us, to attack us in different ways. But ultimately, he cannot go against the will of God. He is limited. He is restricted. I cannot sit here and pretend that I know the answer to this. I don't know why this is the case. If I did, I would be God. I have to accept that there is something here that I do not understand and that no human being will ever understand. But it seems to be the case. You see that God, for reasons known to him, has allowed Satan to continue his activities, at least for the time being. Now, Satan is described in the Bible as the prince of this world. What does that mean? It means that Satan is in control. He is in charge of a world that has turned away from God. This is a mystery. Satan's rule, Satan's power, cannot have been given to him as a reward for his rebellion. Why would God make Satan the ruler of this world? Because he has rebelled against him. It makes no sense. Therefore, it's more likely that Satan was made the prince of this world before he rebelled against God. In fact, it may well be that it was this honor given to him which propelled Satan to rebel in the first place. That he thought that because he was the prince of this world, he had the freedom and he had the power, the ability to reject God, that he could become his own God because of all the authority and power which had been given to him. But of course, if that's the case, when he did rebel against God, then the world was dragged down into that rebellion. The world found itself being ruled by someone who had rebelled against the Creator. God is a God of law and order. He has put order into his universe. The universe functions according to what we call natural laws. We can discover what those laws are, and we can use them to develop the potential which the world has. If this is the case, we believe this, then rebellion against God is lawlessness. It is rebellion against the law. It is the rule of arbitrary desire and not of objective principle. Satan is not governed by logic. Satan is not governed by laws, the laws given by God, but governed simply by his passions, by his pride, by his rebellion. Now we see this, of course, all the time in human affairs. And this is where we come back to what the prophet had to say about the king of Babylon. Because what we see in the world is that whenever somebody sets himself up as a king or as a dictator or as a ruler in some way, he makes himself the law. There is no law to which he is subjected. If such laws exist, if a dictator takes over in a country and there are laws and there's a parliament and there are judges and so on, those laws, that parliament and those judges have to do what the dictator wants. If they try to resist the dictator's will, they are destroyed. They are taken away. They are not respected because the rule of law is contrary to the rule of passion and the desire of the ruler. That's why the law is there in many cases. So we see this all the time. But the result, of course, is that the great leader, the dictator, who claims to be bringing peace and harmony to his people because they're all doing what he wants, in fact, are very insecure. There is no peace. There is no security. There is no happiness. Why? Because the ruler is not subject to the law of God. The ruler cannot be controlled. And this is what we find with Satan. You see, Satan can rebel against God's will. He can rebel against nature, because nature is, of course, the law of creation. He can do that. He can reject it if he wants. But he cannot conquer it. Ultimately, he is subjected to it as just as much as we are. Why is this the case? because the Creator's will is sovereign. God is sovereign over everything, and his will cannot be thwarted. So Satan lives in a kind of fantasy world where he thinks he can get away with his rebellion against God, but in fact, the more he rebels, the more we see that God's will, God's sovereign power, opposes him and prevents him from achieving the kind of success that he wants to have, that he believes he can get. Now, I've already said that the existence of Satan and the existence of evil is a mystery. Why does God allow this to happen? And many people have found this a huge difficulty in their own understanding. They say, well, if God is good, which he is, and if God is all-powerful, which he is, why does he not destroy evil? If he does not want to destroy Satan completely, why does he not force Satan to give up his rebellion? I mean, is that not possible? You see, can God not insist that Satan must come back and obey him? Well, that clearly does not happen, and ultimately we don't know why it doesn't happen. But perhaps, again, the answer lies in the nature of free will itself. And here I would take an example from human life, from our family lives. It happens in many families that children rebel against their parents. They don't do what their parents want them to do. Sometimes, of course, this is just part of growing up, that the child gets to the point where he wants to be independent and feels that the power of the parent is standing in his way. And so he rejects what the parents say. He wants to go his own way. Now, the parents will understand very often that this is not a good idea, that the child will probably find that going his own way is actually going to lead him into trouble, going to lead him into harm. But wise parents often think to themselves, I know this is wrong, I know this is not going to work out for the child, but the child must discover this for himself. I can tell him that this is not going to work. I can try to force him to do what I want to do. But in the end, that is not really the best way to go forward with this. Because although I might be able to force the child to do my will for a certain time, immediately, in the longer term, in the longer run, I cannot control him like this. I mean, if he just submits to my will without understanding why and without accepting my way of thinking, why I'm doing this, then I'm not really establishing the kind of relationship with my child that I want to have. I will have a child who does my will, but who resents this, who's not really thinking the way that I think. And perhaps this is also what we see with God in his relationship, not only to Satan, but also to us. It is not that God likes what Satan is doing. Of course he does not. But God knows that if he forces Satan to change, if he forces Satan back into his kingdom, that this is not what God really wants either. You see, if Satan is ever going to be reconciled to God, it must be because Satan wants this, that Satan understands that this is the right thing to do, that Satan in effect repents and is given a new mind, is born again, as we would say as Christians. Now, as I say, there's no indication in the Bible that this will happen, or even that this can happen. That's never mentioned. But that is the sort of thing that would be necessary for a true reconciliation between God and Satan. And so forcing him to do that is not the answer. It's not going to work, because you will end up not with what you want, which is a relationship with this angel, with Satan, which is a positive and a good and a constructive one. You will end up by turning Satan into your slave, into a robot of some kind, and that is not why God made him. That is not what God wants from him. What we say about Satan, of course, we will say also about ourselves. And this is very important to us, for us to understand. It may, in fact, be the only way that we can somehow begin to analyze and explain the existence of evil in the world. The first principle we have to bear in mind here, and this has been underlying everything that I have said, is that evil is not an independent reality. It is not a thing in itself which God has created. Evil is a corruption of what is essentially good. What God made is good. The good has in different ways gone wrong. It has rebelled against God. So how do you deal with this? If the answer is to destroy it, if you want to destroy it, then you are going too far. You see, you are destroying the good thing which has been made, in order to get rid of the evil which has corrupted it. Now that may be necessary in human affairs. Sometimes, for example, if part of your body has developed a cancer, the only way to get rid of the cancer is to take that part of the body out, to remove it, and so on, so that the cancer will not spread any further. That may be true in human terms. But of course, if you do that, if you take a part of your body out, like your liver or your kidney or something, or a lung or something like this, that thing is no longer there. So you are living really with something that is missing in you. And either you get a replacement for it, which may be possible in some cases, or you just live without it if you can, you see, in some way or other. This is not really healing the problem. I mean, it may be living with things, it may be reducing the danger in some way, but it's not a cure. It's not solving the problem. Healing is redeeming these things. It is somehow taking the evil out, because the evil was never meant to be there in the first place. Now, if that is the way we think, then perhaps we can start to understand why God tolerates the existence of evil. It's not that he likes it, and it's not that he wants it to continue, but he can only redeem the thing which has been corrupted by evil by working on this to bring healing, to expel the evil, to remove it, to remove this corruption in some way or other, and not destroy the thing which has been corrupted. You see, how can you save the fundamental underlying thing and deal with the corruption at the same time? You see, sort of work out that, get rid of the corruption. Now, you can only do that, of course, by patient working on the thing which has been corrupted. It may take time. Healing is not necessarily automatic. It may involve many complicated factors that we do not immediately perceive. But that is what we have to do in the long term. And here I would just say, look at yourself. If God has spoken to you, and if God has convicted you of the sin in your life, and if you have repented to Him in His presence, if you have asked for forgiveness from God, and you have received that forgiveness, and you have been given a new life, then of course you know that healing and restoration is possible. But you see, if God had destroyed you at the beginning because you were in rebellion against Him, then that process of healing and restoration would have been impossible. This is not to say that the old life that you used to live was a good thing, and that, we should be happy with that. No, of course not. But it was a real thing. It was something that was there, and God had to tolerate it in some way, not to let it continue forever, but in order to bring healing to it. And so this is the way I think we have to look at His plan for us and His plan for the world. That God does not destroy things which have become corrupted, things which have turned against Him, but He works with these things, He works on these things to bring healing to them. He has chosen to do this in a way that is deeply mysterious, but in a way that respects us as He has made us. God wants us to be His servants in His kingdom. He wants us to obey His commands. But He wants us to do this willingly. You see, He wants me to want to obey Him, and to want to do what is right, not just to force me into this, but to bring me back into the position of fellowship, of relationship with Him, of being a co-worker with Him that He originally created me to be. And so, having that aim in view, you see, He must work on me, He must deal with me in a way that brings that reality back into life. You can talk to doctors about this, who will tell you that treating a patient, treating disease, sometimes requires great patience in this way, so that the corruption, the evil which is there, will be healed. It may be a simple operation just to take it out, but if you just take it out like that, like a tumor, for example, in the brain, or something of this kind, you may kill the patient. That's not what you want to do. Now, this is just a picture, of course, of the way God works, but it seems that God deals with us in this way, and that this helps us to understand why he seems to tolerate evil. It looks like that, you see, when we analyze it in that particular way. But actually it's not. Actually, it's part of a deeper and wider plan that he has for our salvation. Now, another interesting thing about Satan and the way that God deals with him is that God does not fight Satan himself. There's no instance in the Bible of God confronting Satan. There's no great battle between the forces of good and the forces of evil, shall we say, with God leading one side and Satan the other. Why not? Well, the first reason is that God is sovereign. God is above Satan. Satan has does not have equality with God. He may have wanted that. He may have tried to become his own God, but that is out of the question. It is not possible. God always remains sovereign and above Satan. There's a very interesting picture of this in the book of Job. If you read the first chapter of the book of Job, you will see that the picture given to us there is that Satan is wandering to and fro, wandering up and down in the kingdom of heaven. And he wants permission from God to persecute Job, you see, to test Job. Because God says, this Job is loyal to me, he is a righteous man, he's a good person, and he will not turn away from me. And Satan says, well, let me try, let me tempt him, because I think I can turn Job away from worshiping you. And God says, well, you go and try to do that if you want. It won't work. I'm telling you now, he won't do that. But you can try and just make sure that you don't kill him. You see, there are limits to what Satan can do. So we see this picture. You see that God is basically limiting the power of Satan in that way. But there is no direct confrontation with him. There is no battle back and forth. When the battle occurs, because there is a battle against the forces of evil, yes, and we see this in the book of Revelation, in chapter 12 and in verse 7, what we see is that God does not attack Satan himself directly. What does he do? He sends an angel to do it. That the battle between good and evil is a battle between good angels and bad angels, between Michael, as he is called, and Satan. You see, the rebellious angel. Now, why is this so? Well, it is a question, I think, of honor and hierarchy. If you think in diplomatic terms, you may begin to understand this. If the Minister of Foreign Affairs from another country comes to visit your country, then the government of your country will send the Minister of Foreign Affairs to greet this person when he arrives at the airport. Why? Because they are on the same level. If the president of another country comes to visit, and the president of your country sends the Minister of Foreign Affairs to greet him, that may be regarded as an insult, because you are in effect saying that the president of this other country is not important enough for the president of your country to greet him himself, you see. So he sends somebody who is inferior to himself in order to indicate to the president of this other country that he's not as important as he thinks he is. This is the way that diplomacy works. Well, perhaps we see something similar to this here. You see that in confronting Satan, God will not deal with Satan directly. Why? Because to do this would be to give an honor and a status to Satan that he does not deserve. Now, Satan, of course, wants to be regarded as God's equal. He wants to be regarded as a power just as important as God is. But God cannot do this. You see, God cannot accept this. If God is going to deal with Satan, he will deal with Satan at Satan's level. What is that level? That level is the level of an angel. And so he sends another angel to do battle. See, the two angels are on the same level of hierarchy. And we see here something which I think is an indication of God's sense of humor, if I can put it like that. Why? Because the angel whom he sends to defeat Satan is called Michael. And Michael is a name which means who is like God. Question, you're saying, who is like God? Well, of course, there is nobody like God. And by sending this angel and calling him Michael, you see, God is saying to Satan, who is like me? Who is like God? And the implication is, you are not you, Satan. You think you are like me, but you are not. And I am indicating to you the position that you occupy by sending my angel, my servant, to rebuke you, to attack you, not just with the force of his arms, but also with the force of his being, by who he is. You see, by sending him as my messenger, as my ambassador, I am in effect proclaiming my sovereignty over you. You cannot defeat me, and you cannot defeat the one I send to you. So in the great battle, you see, at the end of time between good and evil, this is the position, this is the way that God deals with this. To put it simply, God does not give Satan the honor that Satan wants. You see, Satan craves this. He really wants to be recognized by God, to be recognized as an equal. And God says, no, 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 I will never do that. And so, of course, Satan is frustrated in his greatest desire. Now, Satan has to accept that. He knows that fundamentally he does not have a power of his own. He cannot do these things. So what is the result? Does Satan say, okay, I'm not as powerful as I think. I have to limit myself to what I'm able to do and accept that I have an inferior position in the world created by God. Well, no, of course he doesn't do this, because again, this is his pride. You see, this is the pride which has corrupted his mind and his way of thinking. So what does he do? He tries to deceive people into thinking that he is more powerful than he actually is. And this is why he is called by the name that he has, because Satan means the deceiver. He is the one who tries to pretend to be someone and something that he is not. And of course, why would he do this? Well, what's the purpose of this? Well, the only purpose in trying to deceive is to pretend, both to others and no doubt to himself, that he is more powerful than he really is. And this is what Satan actually does. You see, he tries to project this image of himself. You see that he is in fact somebody worth listening to, somebody worth following, someone who can explain the mysteries of God to other people who don't understand. You see that he can be a guide, he can be a true leader of people, and by presenting himself in this way, you see, he can deceive us into following him. Now, I said before that Satan can appear as an angel of light. You will find that, if you look in your Bible, 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 14 and 15, where the Apostle Paul actually says this, you see, and presents Satan in this way. And of course, from his point of view, it is a very clever strategy. Satan has no desire to come into your life and my life as a source of evil. He is not going to come and present himself to you and say, look at me, I'm the worst creature that God has ever made, I'm absolutely terrible, you must accept me and follow me because of this. No. The evil power does not present himself in this way. There would be no point. Because if the evil power came to you and said, I want you to follow me because I'm going to kill you, you would not listen to this. You see, there's nothing attractive about this. There's no reason to follow Satan. And this would be a very bad strategy on his part. So although these things are all true, of course, I mean, I'm not saying they are not true, this is not the way that Satan will approach us. Satan will approach us in the guise of a savior. He will approach us in the guise of light, of someone who gives us understanding. And we see this, of course, in the Garden of Eden. We will be looking at that later. But Satan comes to human beings with the promise of knowledge. You see that he will give them knowledge that they do not have. And it's no accident that in the modern world, the greatest rebellion against God that has ever occurred in human history is called the Enlightenment. It is called the Enlightenment because it claims to bring light and knowledge and understanding to the human race. Now, of course, if you look at this, if you look at the Enlightenment and what has happened in the last 300 years or so, you can see that there are many good things about it. It is true that we have seen an enormous growth in scientific knowledge. We've seen great developments in technology. We have seen even developments in human relations. We may say that it is because of the Enlightenment that slavery has been abolished. You see, that the idea that all human beings are created equal, that nobody has the right to enslave another human being, this is now generally accepted. We can say that it is the Enlightenment which has established the equality between men and women, that women have been set free in a way and to a degree that was not true in earlier times, and so on. You see, we can say many things like this And people will say, well, this is because of the Enlightenment. Before this time, before people started to think in a rational and logical way about themselves and about the world around us and so on, there was a darkness. And in the darkness, people did things that were wrong. People surrendered to prejudice, to hatred of one another. This all sounds very good. And of course, in many ways it is. I mean, nobody today, and certainly not I would not do this, criticize these developments. I'm glad, that we have made progress in science and technology. I am glad that we accept the fundamental equality of all human beings. I am glad that men and women, share equally in these things, and indeed much more than was the case in the past. I'm not condemning or criticizing these things. But along with this development, and you see, this is where the problem comes, along with this development, there has also come a rejection of the power of God. You see, before the Enlightenment, there was very little atheism in the world. There was some. I mean, there were always people who believed there was no God and so on. But this was a very minority thing. It is since the coming of the Enlightenment that atheism has become a major influence. I'm not saying, I don't know how many people actually believe it, and so on. That's another question, but atheism has acquired a power in the world today which it never had before. Now, of course, if that happens, what is happening is that human beings are cutting themselves off from the source of their life by denying that there is such a thing. You see, we are just denying that there is a God. And Satan never went that far. I mean, Satan didn't deny that God exists. He simply denied that he was subject to God, that he had to do what God wanted. But he allowed that there is a God. Modern people, many of them, do not accept that. You see, they are atheists. They say there is no God. So in this respect, they are worse than Satan. But they have followed him by falling into the trap of thinking that this is a source of light. You see, that by denying the existence of God, they have come to a knowledge of life and of the world which is superior. And what we see, and I will come back to this in the lectures that I'm going to give, what we see here is a growth of rebellion, human rebellion, which is justified by this belief. You see, by the belief that we have come into light by abandoning the source of light. This is the ultimate rebellion of Satan, and it is the rebellion which controls so much of our modern human life. This is the end of our seminar session. I'm very glad to have been able to share it with you. I have laid down certain principles and certain ideas which I am going to develop in the lectures which will follow this seminar. There will be 5 lectures divided like the seminar into 2 parts each, and I hope that you will be able to stay with me and follow what I have to say in developing these basic principles. So thank you very much, and I look forward to being with you again very soon. Thank you.